Mr. Speaker.
Dr. Rajan Prasad.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to take a final call on this bill, which, as the Minister has said, is an important piece of legislation. And I hope he's satisfied that the opposition has treated it as such and at every stage, including the select committee stages, ensured that the interests of those children were at the forefront. And the legislation does address some of the aspects of the history of child abuse in New Zealand. It is awful. And the level of public disquiet there is about abuse, particularly about a number of recent cases. So this is an attempt to address that. And also the level of frustration that citizens feel out there about the inability of some parents to keep their children and the vulnerable people they are in their care safe. So it is important for those reasons. So now expectations of parents have been codified, and particularly with respect to vulnerable children and vulnerable adults. And so it's a good response to that. It's also a response to public expectations that these matters will be addressed, and we have supported that. So the bill makes it a legal duty now for caregivers to keep their children safe, and that's no bad thing. For those who don't, they commit a criminal offence, and the penalty for that, Mr. Speaker, are quite severe. 10 years of imprisonment is a severe punishment. So it will be, at least in the minds of parents, and that's to be supported. And parents and caregivers will now have a duty to provide a level of care, provide the necessaries, and to take steps to protect those that they are caring for from injury and harm. A thought does go through our mind that the way the bill has addressed that problem, there is an assumption in that this was the problem anyway, that there was a lack of willingness to provide for the safety of the children and those in their care. And that I believe is debatable. Why people do this is actually a much bigger question, and certainly the bill does not address that. Those closely connected with taking care of vulnerable children and vulnerable adults will now have to take reasonable steps to protect the victim. And no reasonable person will find any of these provisions troublesome, especially if they only focused on holding those who abuse accountable to be appropriately punished. That was the view. However, the other point I want to make is that it would be a mistake to believe that these provisions will actually solve the problem we have before us and eliminate the problem of abuse and neglect of vulnerable children and adults. Because I don't think on its own it will do that, Mr. Speaker. It goes some way. The Children's Commissioner in this case made perhaps the most valuable point, that indeed if these provisions are to work, then they must be complemented with an investment into the preventative and other responsive services for those children and families who find themselves in vulnerable positions. Many of those who have been abused and neglected really have had terrible lives as well, and whether they're mental health issues, depression issues, lack of confidence, self-respect, poor education, etc., those issues need to be addressed as well. And so the other part of this that has not been addressed here, but we've reminded government throughout that those need to be taken into account, and especially when it comes to the effects of poverty. Because many of these people many of the ones who do abuse and the identified cases are poor, and those issues have not been addressed. And certainly over 2 weeks of questioning from this side of the House, we have not been satisfied that the government speakers and indeed the ministers have not answered that question fully for us. Just wanted to also say very briefly, and the last point I want to make, is that it was perhaps a mistake and an error to have the claim of right issue embedded in this particular bill. And the way that's been done, there is, as Charles Cheval was saying in the committee stages, that there is an unintended consequence of all of that, which is those cases in which a claim of right does appropriately apply have now do not have that defence before them. So, Mr. Speaker, with those last words, we're pleased to support this bill, and now that it's come to this point, we look forward to see its effectiveness. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker.
Kamal Sivaloni.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to